Elias lived on the wind-scoured edge of things. His cabin sat where the town of Harmony Creek gave up, the last small parcel of fenced land before the hills turned wild and rolled west toward the shale canyons. He was a quiet man, one who repaired his own fences, kept his horse well shod, and rode long hours through the high, lonely country. He spoke when spoken to, and the townsfolk found him decent enough, if maybe a little too fond of his own company. They did not know he was haunted. He was haunted by the memory of a woman named Cora. His days were a routine of hard work, a ritual against memory. He would rise before the sun, make coffee, and check on old Jet, his horse. Then he would ride out, mending the barbed wire that kept his small herd from wandering, or clearing fallen rock from the spring. The physical labor was good. It tired his body and demanded his attention. But in the silences, she returned. He would see her in the way the afternoon light hit a patch of cured grass, or in the smell of the soap he used to wash his hands, the same kind she had favored. The nights were the hardest. The cabin was a single room, and it held her absence like a wound. He would sit at his small table, the lamp casting a low, yellow light, and the quiet would press in. It was in those hours he let himself remember, let the ghost of her sit across from him. She had arrived 2 years ago on the afternoon stage, the new school teacher. The town had been starved for one. She was not what they expected. She was quiet, with a careful, measured way of moving, as if she expected the ground to give way. She was kind, especially to the children, but she had a stillness about her, a reserve that kept the town's busybodies at a distance. Elias saw it right away. She was running from something. He first spoke to her when he was hired to fix the leaking roof of the schoolhouse. He worked for hours, the sound of his hammer echoing over the small yard. She did not bother him, but when he came down the ladder, she was there with a dipper of cool water. He nodded, taking it. His hands were grimy with pine tar. "Thank you, ma'am," he'd said. "It is I who should thank you, Mr. Elias," she said. Her voice was low, and it held no flutter, no false brightness. He looked at her then, really looked. She was dressed in a simple gray wool, her hair pulled back tight. She was younger than he first thought, but her eyes were old. They were the color of the sky just before a storm, and they held a fear he recognized. It was the same fear a cornered animal has. He drank the water and handed the dipper back. Their fingers brushed. It was nothing. It was everything. Their love, if it could be called that, was built in the spaces between words. He was not a man given to easy talk, and she was a woman who guarded her own. He took to finding reasons to be near the schoolhouse. A fence post needed setting. A window latch was broken. She would come out, and they would stand in the fading light. They talked about the land, about the changing seasons. He told her how to tell the weather by the clouds massing over the western ridges. She told him about the books she read to the children, stories of places far from the dust and wind of the plains. One evening, he found her sitting on the schoolhouse steps long after the children had gone home. She was crying, silent tears that tracked through the dust on her face. He did not ask what was wrong. He sat on the step below her, not touching, just being there. He watched the sun go down, a great smear of orange and red, until the sky turned to purple and the first stars appeared. She finally spoke, her voice thick. "Sometimes I think I will never be safe." He wanted to tell her she was safe with him, but he knew, even then, that the thing she feared was not something his hands or his gun could fix. So he said, "You are safe tonight, Cora." He started walking her back to her boarding house. They walked in silence, the sound of their boots on the hard-packed dirt. When they reached her gate, she stopped him, a light touch on his arm. "Elias," she whispered. He turned. She stood very still. Then she rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. It was a brief, dry touch, but it burned him. After that, the wall between them lowered, brick by brick. They met late, walking by the creek when the moon was high. She never spoke of her past, not directly, but she told him she liked the quiet, that loud noises made her tremble. She told him she had come west to start over, where no one knew her name. He noticed she always sat with her back to the wall. He saw the faint, pale scar that ran from her left cuff, disappearing up her sleeve. He never asked about it. Their connection was built on rare touches, a hand held in the dark, him brushing a stray piece of hair from her face. One night, in the deep shadow of the livery, he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hungry and desperate and full of all the words they could not say. She clung to him, her fingers digging into his coat, and he knew he was lost. He had not known he could feel this way, a deep, protective ache that settled in his bones. Then, one morning, she was gone. He had gone to her boarding room, a small book of poems he thought she might like in his hand. The landlady, Mrs. Gable, said she had not seen her. The door to her room was unlocked. The room was cold. The window was open, the thin curtain stirring in the breeze. Her bed was made, the covers pulled tight. It was too neat. It was the room of someone who had packed and left, not the room of someone who intended to return. And on the washstand, a single folded piece of paper. His name was written on it, in her careful, clean script, Elias. He opened it. His hands were steady. The note was 3 lines. My dear Elias, don't look for me. I'm not safe. I will only bring you pain. Cora. He read the words twice. He folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket, the one over his heart. He walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. Mrs. Gable asked him, "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Elias said. "She must have stepped out." He told no one. When the town began to wonder where the schoolteacher was, Elias said nothing. When the sheriff asked him, as he asked everyone, if he had seen Miss Reed, Elias shook his head. Not since yesterday. He'd lied. He kept her absence like a private wound, a thing he could not show. Their love had been a secret, and so his grief would be a secret, too. He let the town believe she had simply run off, perhaps with a traveling salesman, perhaps back east. They called her flighty, unreliable. He let them. He knew the truth. She was not flighty. She was terrified. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of rising before the sun, mending fences, and riding the long, empty hills. The note was still in his pocket, worn soft as cloth, the creases threatening to tear. He kept it, a reminder of the one good thing he had found and lost. He lived quietly, haunted by the woman who told him not to look for her. He had honored her wish, until today. He was in the mercantile, buying flour and coffee, when Jedediah Stone, a passing trader, started talking. Jed knew every route from here to the territories, and his tongue was as loose as his morals. "Saw the strangest setup out past the Red Canyons," Jed was saying to Mr. Harris, the owner. "A revival camp. This preacher, Reverend Pike, claims he's saving fallen women." Elias kept his back to them, measuring out beans. "He's got a dozen of them," Jed went on, his voice oily. "Keeps them under lock and key, near enough. Says he's protecting them from sin, but it looked like a work camp to me. They all looked half-starved and scared." "That's a shame," Mr. Harris said, polishing a glass. "But here's the thing," Jed said, leaning in. "One of them brought me water, a quiet one. Kept her head bowed, but I saw her hands." Elias stopped breathing. "She had scars," Jed said. "Burn scars. Looked like bad ones, climbing up her arm. She wore this little silver locket, and she moved like a ghost. Fragile thing. They called her Miss Leah, but she had the look of a woman who's had another name burned out of her." Elias turned, slow and deliberate. The sack of beans felt heavy in his hand. "Where?" he said. His voice was rusty from disuse. Jed looked at him, surprised. "Way out. A good 3-day ride. In the foothills of the mesas. But you don't want to go there. Elias, that pike is a hard man. And besides, there's a storm blowing in. A real killer. The sky to the north had been a bruised, heavy gray all morning. The wind had a high, thin whine to it. Elias dropped a few coins on the counter. Tell me the way. Jed, seeing the look in Elias's eyes, a look he'd only seen on men about to kill or be killed, told him. He drew a map on a scrap of brown paper. You cross the shallow creek, head for the 3 buttes, and follow the canyon north. The camp is in a box canyon. You can't miss it, but I'm telling you, Elias, that storm. Elias took the map, folded it, and put it in his pocket. Next to her letter, he left the flour and coffee on the counter and walked out. He went to his cabin. The wind was picking up, rattling the door in its frame. He moved with a purpose he had not felt in 2 years. The numbness that had coated his life was gone, burned away by a single, terrible spark of hope. He packed dried beef, a block of hardtack, coffee in a small pot, his bedroll and his heavy oilskin coat. He took his rifle from the wall, checking the action. He strapped his revolver to his hip. He put every cartridge he owned into his saddlebags. He went to the small stable and saddled old Jet. The horse tossed its head, sensing the urgency and the sharp drop in the air pressure. Easy, boy, Elias murmured, his hand gentle on the horse's neck. We got a long ride. He looked back at the cabin one last time. It had been his prison, his sanctuary, his tomb. He was leaving it. He did not know if he would be back. He mounted and rode out, not toward the town, but west, toward the hills. He didn't know what he would say when he found her. He didn't know if it was even her, a woman with scars and a locket. It was thin, but it was all he had. She had written, "Don't look for me." He had listened for 2 years. He was done listening. The landscape turned harsh quickly. The rolling grass hills gave way to rock and shale. The wind was a physical blow, a solid wall he had to push through. It came from the north, carrying the smell of ice. By afternoon, the sleet started. It was not a gentle rain. It was hard. Tiny pellets that stung his face and clicked against his coat. The temperature dropped. The mud on the trail began to stiffen, then freeze. He crossed the shallow creek. It was not shallow. It was wide and brown, swollen with early melt from the high country. Old Jet balked at the edge, the water churning and fast. Go on, Elias urged, his heels digging into the horse's flanks. The horse plunged in. The water was shockingly cold, a living, biting thing. It soaked Elias's legs to the thigh, filling his boots. The current tried to pull them downstream, but Jet was strong. The horse fought, its breath coming in great white clouds, and scrambled up the far bank, shivering and slick. Elias did not stop to rest, or to drain his boots. The cold would freeze him if he stopped. He had to keep moving. He rode into the shale canyons Jed had described. Here, the wind was a monster. It howled, a high, lonely scream that echoed off the rock walls. He had to dismount, his legs numb and clumsy, and led the horse. The frozen ground was slick, and the horse stumbled. As he walked, he pulled the wool scarf from his neck and wrapped it tighter around his face. It was her scarf. She had mended it for him, one night in his cabin. He remembered watching her. The fire was low, the light from the single lamp soft. She sat on the floor, her head bent, the needle in her hand moving with a quick, sure rhythm. He had been sitting in his chair, watching the way the light caught the fine hairs at the nape of her neck. He had felt a wave of tenderness so powerful it almost made him dizzy. He knelt beside her. She looked up, her eyes wide, startled. He did not touch her face. He did not kiss her. He took her free hand, the one that lay in her lap. He turned it over. Her palm was soft. He pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist. She had made a sound, a tiny, sharp intake of breath. She trembled, a vibration that ran from her wrist all the way up her arm. But she did not pull away. "Elias," she had whispered, And it was not a word. It was a prayer. It was an anchor. The wind screamed his name now. The sleet had turned to snow, thick and heavy, driven almost horizontal by the wind. He could not see more than 10 feet in front of him. The world was a churning white wall. He was a fool. He knew it. He was riding into a blizzard, chasing a ghost, on the word of a man he did not trust. He was freezing. The water in his boots had turned to ice. He could no longer feel his toes or his fingers. His hands were numb claws on the reins. Old Jet was flagging. The horse's head was down, its steps short and heavy. The snow was bawling in its hooves. Night was falling, though the day had never truly been light. It was a suffocating, gray-white darkness. He had to find shelter. He could not last the night in the open. He scanned the black outlines of the canyon walls, squinting through the snow. He was looking for a cave, an overhang, anything. Old Jet stopped. The horse refused to move. Its ears pricked forward. "What is it, boy?" Elias slurred. His lips were stiff. He slid from the saddle, his legs collapsing under him. He fell to his knees in the snow. He was so tired. It would be so easy to lie down. Just for a minute. He fought the urge. He crawled, dragging his useless legs. He felt it before he saw it. A break in the wind. A dark shape against the snow. A collapsed line shack, a hunter's cabin. Maybe 3 walls of stone still stood, with a few rotten timbers of a roof still clinging to the top. It was not much. It was everything. He dragged himself inside, out of the worst of the wind. He whistled, a thin, weak sound. Old Jet, loyal to the last, stumbled forward and huddled in the lee of the standing wall, blocking the entrance. Elias fumbled with his saddlebags, his hands thick and stupid. He pulled his bedroll out. It was already stiff with ice. He could not start a fire. He had no dry tinder, and his hands would not work the flint and steel. He huddled against the cold stone, pulling the frozen blanket around him. The shaking started, a deep, violent shudder that rattled his teeth and seemed to shake his bones loose. This was it. This was how he died, freezing to death in a forgotten shack, chasing a memory. "No," he whispered, the word a puff of white vapor. He would not die here. He thought of her, Cora. He pictured her face, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. A rare, beautiful thing. He pictured her hands, the ones with the scars. He pictured the locket. He had come for her. He would not let a little snow stop him. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to focus. He focused on the pain, the burning in his feet, the ache in his hands. He focused on the memory of her kissing his cheek. He focused on the anger, the cold, silent rage he felt at the thing that had made her run. He huddled deeper into the blanket, breathing on his frozen hands. He just had to make it until morning. He would find her. He would find her, or he would die trying. The storm howled, but in his heart, a different, colder fire was burning. Her name, now, was Leah. Miss Leah, to the other women. Sister Leah, to the Reverend Pike. It was a name as thin and gray as her blanket, and she wore it with the same dull resignation. She lived in the camp, a collection of canvas tents and mud-wattle huts huddled in the lee of a box canyon, a place that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The land here was unforgiving, a stretch of high plain where the wind never seemed to stop. Reverend Pike called it their furnace, a place to burn away sin. Cora, now Leah, just called it cold. Her days were marked by a strict and joyless routine, governed by the preacher's bell, awake before dawn, a prayer service on their knees in the snow or mud. Then chores. Her chore was tending the sick. The camp was full of women Pike had saved, women who had been cast out, or who were running from husbands or laws, or who had simply had nowhere else to go. They were a flock of broken birds, and Pike was their stern, unsmiling shepherd. Leah avoided attention. She kept her head down, her voice low. She did her work with a quiet efficiency that made her invisible. She bathed women shaking with fever. She bound the sores of the ones who had walked too far. She spoon-fed broth to the ones too weak to hold a cup. She was worn, and the coldness of the place had seeped into her. The soft, hopeful schoolteacher was gone. This Miss Leah was harder, her eyes guarded, her movements spare. But the kindness remained, buried deep. She would slip an extra piece of hardtack to Martha, a girl barely 16 who cried herself to sleep. She would sit by the cot of old Sadie, who saw snakes in the shadows, and hold her hand until the terror passed. The other women trusted her. She was like them, broken. Only when she was alone, in the dead of night, did the mask slip. She would lie on her thin straw pallet, the wind rattling the canvas, and her hands would begin to shake. It was a tremor that started in her palms and ran up her arms, a physical memory of a terror she could not bury. Her hands, the ones she used to heal, betrayed her. They remembered. They remembered the fire. It had been 4 years ago, but in her mind, it was always last night. She had been a teacher then, too, in a small town in the Ohio Valley. She had her own schoolhouse, a single bright room filled with sunlight and the smell of chalk and new wood. She had been proud of it. He had come to town, Jebediah Thorne, the sheriff's son. He was a man who saw the world as a collection of things he could take, and he had decided he wanted her. He was handsome, in a way that frightened her. He talked loud and smiled too much, his eyes never matching the expression on his mouth. She had refused him, politely at first, then firmly. She told him she was not interested. Jebediah Thorne was not a man who understood the word no. He saw it as a challenge, or an insult. He began to wait for her after school. He sent her gifts, she returned. He told the town they were to be married, a lie that made her stomach turn. She went to his father, the sheriff. The man had laughed at her. "My boy's just taken with you, ma'am. You should be flattered." The night it happened, she had been working late, grading papers by the light of a kerosene lamp. The door opened. It was Jebediah. He was not smiling. He had been drinking. "I gave you a chance to be nice. Cora," he'd said, his voice thick. "Now you'll learn." He had grabbed her. She fought. She was stronger than he thought, and fear gave her a wild, desperate energy. She clawed at his face. She kicked him. She broke free and ran for the door. He had grabbed the lamp. With a calm, deliberate motion, he hurled it against the far wall, where her books were stacked. The wall exploded in flame, kerosene and dry paper. The room was full of smoke and a terrible whooshing sound. She stood frozen in the doorway, the heat scorching her face. "You're a witch," he sneered, his face lit by the flames. "And that's how we treat witches here. You'll burn, or you'll be mine. Either way." He had lunged for her again, but the fire was faster. A burning timber fell from the ceiling, blocking his path. She ran out into the night, the schoolhouse bell, her bell, beginning to melt and warp in the heat. She heard him screaming behind her, a sound of rage, not pain. She did not stop running. She hid in a ditch, watching the sky turn red as her school, her life, burned to the ground. She knew he would not stop. He had crossed a line. He would have to silence her. She saw him later, his arm in a sling, his face bandaged from where she had scratched him. He was telling the sheriff's deputies that she had done it, that she was mad, that she had set the fire herself, trapping him inside. She fled. She took a new name in the next state, and the next. She worked as a laundress, a seamstress, a cook, but always, he found her, or rather, his reputation found her. He had put out word, sent letters, fabricated wanted posters for arson, for theft. He was claiming she was his wife, that she had run off. He would not let her go. She had made it to Harmony Creek. She had found Elias. And she had almost believed she was safe. She had never told Elias the truth. She had been too ashamed, too terrified, to speak of it, to give it a name. felt like summoning the devil. She had loved him. Oh, she had loved him. She loved his quiet, his stillness. He was the only man who had ever made her feel safe. He did not want to take anything from her. He just wanted to be near her. Lying on her pallet in the frozen tent, she would dream of him. It was always the same dream. They were lying on a blanket, far out in the hills, under a sky so full of stars it looked like spilled diamonds. He would be pointing out the constellations, his voice a low rumble beside her. He would touch her hand, not to grab, not to hold, just a light touch, his fingers resting over hers, and in the dream, her hands were steady. Then she would wake up. The dream would fade, and the cold would be there. The fear would be there. She had left him because to stay would have been to bring Jebediah Thorne down on him. Elias was a strong man, a capable man. He would have tried to protect her, and he would have died. Jebediah would have seen to it. She had left a note. "Don't look for me." It was the cruelest thing she had ever done. It was the kindest. The storm had hit the camp 2 days ago. It was the same storm Elias was fighting. A wall of ice and wind that turned the canyon into a howling pit. The temperature had dropped so low the creek that ran through the canyon had frozen solid, except for a small, fast-moving channel in the center. Reverend Pike, however, did not believe in weather. He believed in duty and the sin of idleness. The sick still needed water. "Sister Leah," he had boomed, his voice loud enough to be heard over the wind. "The jugs are empty. Fill them. The Lord protects the righteous." Cora, now Leah, bowed her head. "Yes, Reverend." She bundled herself in her thin shawl. Grabbing 2 heavy wooden buckets, she walked out of the relative shelter of the tents into the full force of the storm. The wind tore the breath from her lungs, and the snow was so thick it was like walking through a white curtain. She made her way to the creek, her head down, her boots slipping on the new-fallen snow. She reached the bank. The water looked black and angry, a dark, churning ribbon in a world of white. She knelt on a flat, ice-covered rock, bracing herself against the wind, and dipped the first bucket into the freezing water. It was then she saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a dark smudge against the white. It was on the far side of the creek, where the canyon wall was steep. A trick of the light, she thought, a shadow. Then the shadow moved. Her heart stopped. She froze, the half-full bucket still in the water, her hands burning from the cold. It was a horse. A man was on it. He was not moving, but the horse was stumbling, its head down. No one came to the camp. No one. Strangers were forbidden. Pike's men, 2 hard-faced men named Silas and Jonas, would run them off. Or worse. She should run, hide, go back to the tent and tell no one. But the figure was so still. He was slumped forward, a man on the very edge of death. The wind tore at the man's coat, and a piece of cloth, a scarf, came loose from his neck. It flapped, a dark wool scarf with a carefully stitched, mended edge. Cora's world tilted. Her breath hitched. She knew that scarf. She had mended it. Her hands, her shaking hands, had pulled the thread through that exact spot, sitting by the fire in Elias's cabin. It was him. He had looked for her. The fool, the wonderful, terrible fool. He had found her. "No," she whispered. The word was stolen by the wind. She hid. She dropped the bucket and scrambled behind a meager stand of frozen willows on the bank. She crouched, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it would break. He could not see her. He could not. This was ruin. This was death. He had brought her past to her future. He had brought the fire to the ice. The horse, old Jet, stumbled to a stop at the edge of the creek, its sides heaving. The man on its back did not move. He was a statue of ice and snow. Then he lifted his head. He looked across the creek, his gaze sweeping the bank. He could not possibly see her. "Cora," he called. His voice was a rasp, a broken piece of ice. It was not loud, but it cut through the wind and found her. a bullet finding its mark. She stood up. The willows offered no protection. She was exposed. He saw her, even through the snow. She saw his body jolt, a flash of recognition. He tried to dismount. He did not have the strength. He fell, a heavy, ungraceful slide from the saddle. He landed in the snow on the far bank and did not move. Elias. Her own name was a stranger, but his was a prayer. She forgot Leah. She forgot the Reverend Pike. She forgot Jebediah Thorne. She plunged into the creek. The water was a shock, a physical blow. It was so cold it burned. It was above her knees, and the current tugged at her skirts, trying to pull her down. She did not care. She fought her way across, her hands reaching, and scrambled up the opposite bank. He was alive, barely. His eyes were open, but they were dull. His face was gray, his lips blue. He was covered in a thick rime of ice. His scarf, her scarf, was frozen to his jaw.
Elias,
she sobbed, choked, shaking him.
Elias, you idiot, you blessed, stupid man.
He blinked, slow. Cora, he breathed. Found you. You will die if you stay here, she said, her voice frantic. She grabbed his arm, trying to pull him up. He was a dead weight. Help me! You have to help me! He groaned, a deep sound of pain. But he tried. He got his legs under him. She used his horse, his saddle, his own strength against him. And somehow, she got him to his feet. He leaned on her, and she felt the terrible, penetrating cold of his body even through her own soaked clothes. The horse, he whispered. The horse will be fine, she lied. We have to get you inside. She half dragged, half carried him back across the creek. The crossing was a nightmare. He stumbled, pulling her down to her knees in the icy water. But she got him up. She would not let him die. Not now. She got him to the camp. The other women were huddled in the prayer tent. No one saw her. She took him not to her own quarters, but to the small, cold supply tent where she kept her poultices and linens. It was at the far edge of the camp, half hidden by a snowdrift. She pushed him inside, onto a pile of feed sacks. He collapsed. She ran back out, grabbing old Jet's reins and leading the poor, exhausted animal behind the tent. Out of the worst of the wind, she stripped the saddle, her hands numb, and threw a spare, ragged blanket over its back. Then she was back in the tent. She lit a small, shielded lantern, the tiny flame a brave flicker against the cold. She looked at him, really looked at him. He was half frozen. His coat was a solid block of ice. His hands were raw and blue. He was shaking, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that rattled his teeth. And she was angry, a sudden, hot wave of rage that surprised her.
You're a fool,
she hissed, her voice shaking as much as he was. She was pulling at the frozen buckles of his coat. What are you doing here? I told you not to look. I told you. You did, he said, his words chattering. I didn't listen. You'll get us both killed, she cried, pulling her own sodden shawl from her shoulders. He'll find you. Pike's men, they'll kill you. Or he will. The other one, Jebediah. Elias's head came up at the name, his eyes clearing for a second with a cold, hard light. Let him come. No, she said, pulling at his frozen boots. You don't understand. You don't know what he is. I don't care what you did, Cora, he breathed, his eyes closing. I don't care what you're running from. Her hand stopped. She stared at him. He thought she had done something. He thought she was the criminal. The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. I came for you, he whispered, his voice fading. She looked at his face, gray and near death, and the anger broke. It shattered, and beneath it was all the fear, all the guilt, all the desperate, aching longing she had kept buried for 2 years. It came out as a single, dry sob. She worked. She stopped talking. She was Miss Leah again, the healer. She cut his coat off him with her shears. She cut his frozen boots away. His feet were white. waxy. She stripped his wet clothes from him, her hands moving with a desperate, impersonal speed. She did not let herself think about the fact that she was seeing his body. She just worked. She covered him in every dry blanket she had. Piles of rough wool. She grabbed rocks from near the creek bed, the ones she used to heat for the sick, and ran back to the main fire, which was now just a pit of glowing embers. She put the rocks in, her presence unnoticed in the driving snow, and ran back, carrying the scorching hot stones in a bucket. She wrapped them in cloth and put them around him, under the blankets. He was still shaking.
Elias,
she said, her voice soft now.
you have to stay awake.
His eyes fluttered. He was slipping away. She made a decision. It was not a thought. It was an instinct. She crawled under the blankets with him. She stripped off her own wet blouse and skirt, down to her thin chemise, and pressed her body against his. His skin was so cold it burned her. It was like lying next to a block of ice. "Cora," he whispered, a protest.
Shut up, Elias,
She whispered back, her voice breaking.
just shut up and live.
She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him tight against her, her legs tangled with his. She put her face in the hollow of his neck, her cold, wet hair against his skin. She was trying to give him her life, her warmth, what little she had. His shaking was so violent it shook her, too.
I'm scared.
She whispered, her voice a confession in the dark. It was the trite thing she had ever said.
I'm so scared. Elias,
He did not answer. He was barely conscious. And then, after a long time, she felt a change. His hand, the one trapped between them, moved. His fingers, stiff and frozen, found her arm. He gripped her. It was not a strong grip, but it was there. The shaking began to lessen. Just a fraction. She began to weep. It was not the loud sobbing of before. It was a silent, hot flood of tears. Tears of fear, because he was here and her world was ending. Tears of guilt, because she had left him. Tears of longing, because he had come. He had come. He held her arm. He did not make promises. He did not demand anything. He just held on, a frozen man clinging to his only source of warmth. She held him back, a cold woman clinging to her only source of hope. Outside, the storm shrieked, a wild and angry sound, but inside the small, dark tent, there was only the sound of two people breathing, and a silence that held the weight of all the words they had never said. The storm broke on the third day. It did not so much end as it did simply pause, drawing a ragged breath. The wind lessened to a low, mournful keen, and the snow stopped, leaving the world a blinding, sharp-edged white. Inside the small supply tent, Elias was alive. The brutal, body-shaking tremors had subsided, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion, the warmth from Cora's body. The rough wool blankets and the heated stones had chased the worst of the ice from his bones. He was weak. His feet and hands throbbed with a dull, burning pain as life returned to them. But his eyes were clear, and they never left her. Cora had left the tent only twice, moving like a ghost in the pre-dawn gray to steal broth and bread from the cook tent, and again to check on his horse, old Jet, who stood coated in ice but alive, shivering in the lee of the canyon wall. She had brought the horse what little feed she could carry. Now, she sat on a barrel just inside the tent flap, watching the camp come to a slow, frozen life. Men were digging paths through the snow, their breath pluming in the still, frigid air. A shadow fell across the tent opening. Cora did not look up, but her entire body went rigid. "Sister Leah." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a honed blade. It was Reverend Pike. He was a tall man, built of long, hard bones. His face was narrow, his beard neatly trimmed, and his eyes were the color of a frozen lake, pale, flat, and cold. He did not look at her, but rather at the camp, at the men working, at the sky. He held a leather-bound Bible in one hand, his thumb marking a page. "The Lord has tested us with this storm," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He has shown us our weakness, our reliance on the flesh." "Yes, Reverend," Cora whispered, her eyes on the snowy ground. Pike was a man who claimed to save fallen women, but he did not do so with love. He did it with fear. He controlled them by breaking what little spirit they had left. He saw sin in every shadow, every quiet word, every glance. He saved them, he claimed, by isolating them, by making them dependent on his word, his will. He was their judge, jury, and savior, all in one. His cold eyes finally moved, shifting to the interior of her tent. "You have been absent from prayers, Sister Leah, for 2 days." I was tending the sick, Reverend," she said, her voice small. "Martha's fever returned, and Old Sadie is addled. Martha is weak-willed," he cut in. "Your place is with the flock, not hiding yourself away. Sickness of the body is a reflection of sickness in the soul. You will attend the service this evening. You will kneel and ask forgiveness for your vanity." "Vanity, Reverend?" "You hide your face. You hide your heart from the Lord," he said. "It is a form of pride, of vanity. You think your sins are so special they must be hidden." He stepped closer. She could smell the faint, sharp scent of soap and old wool. "I find myself wondering what sins, precisely, you are so carefully guarding." Cora's heart hammered. He was suspicious. He had been suspicious of her from the day she arrived, sensing a strength in her he had not yet managed to break. From behind her, in the dark of the tent, a blanket rustled. Pike's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes narrowed. "What is in there?" Cora's blood turned to ice. She stood, instinctively blocking the entrance. "Linens, Reverend, supplies for the sick." I heard a sound. "The wind, perhaps, or a rat in the feed sacks." Pike stared at her, his gaze dissecting her. He saw the tremor in her hands, which she quickly hid in the folds of her skirt. He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. He smiled, a thin, unpleasant stretching of his lips. "Indeed," he said softly. "A rat. We must be vigilant against all things that creep into the darkness. Sister Leah, all things that burrow and hide." He tapped the Bible against his palm. "See that you are at the service, on your knees." He turned and walked away, his black coat a stark, dark line against the endless white. Cora leaned against the tent pole, her legs shaking so hard she could barely stand. She waited until he was gone, until his 2 men, Silas and Jonas, had followed him into the main prayer tent. Then she ducked back inside, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias was sitting up. He looked pale, but the deadly gray was gone from his face. He had pulled his own trousers back on, though his feet were bare and wrapped in her linen bandages. "You have to leave," she said, the words a desperate rush. "You have to go now, before he finds you." Elias looked at her, his expression grim. "That's him? The preacher?" "That is Reverend Pike," she said, wringing her hands. "He's not a fool. Elias, he's suspicious. He knows something is wrong. If his men find you here, they'll kill you. They will. They are not men of God. They are his guards. They do whatever he says." Elias pushed himself to his feet. He was unsteady, but he stood. He found his gun belt, which she had hidden under a pile of canvas, and began to buckle it, his movements slow but deliberate. "Good," he said. "Good," she cried, her voice rising in panic. "Elias, you don't understand. You can't just fight your way out. This isn't a saloon brawl. This is a—" She stopped, searching for the word. "This is a trap." "I'm not leaving without you," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was final. It was the voice he used when he was setting a fence post in hard ground. It would not be moved. "You can't take me," she said, grabbing his arm. His arm was hard, warm, alive. The feel of him, solid and real, almost undid her. "I'm not going." He turned to face her. His hands, raw and chapped, came up to cup her face. "Cora, I rode through a blizzard for you. I nearly froze to death. I'm not leaving you in this place." "This place keeps me safe," she said, the words tasting like ash. "Safe? From what? From him?" He gestured toward the camp. "He looks like a wolf in sheep's clothing." "Not from him," she said, pulling away from his touch. She paced the tiny tent, her skirts brushing the feed sacks. "From him, the other one, the one I ran from." Elias was silent. Watching her, he had known, from the beginning, that she was running, but he had never known the specifics. He had never asked. He had respected her silence. Now, that silence was a wall between them, and he would tear it down. "Tell me," he said. "Who is he? What did he do?" She stopped pacing. She looked at the canvas wall, as if she could see through it, see all the way back to Ohio, to the fire. "You thought I'd done something, didn't you? When you came for me, you said you didn't care what I did." "It didn't matter," he said. "I did nothing," she said, her voice flat. "I did nothing but say no." And she told him. She told him everything. She told him about Jebediah Thorne, the sheriff's son. She told him about the schoolhouse, the way he claimed her, the way the law laughed at her. She told him about the fire, the smell of the kerosene, the sound of the melting bell. "He tried to burn me alive, Elias," she whispered, her hands shaking. She held them out, the old, pale scars on her arms and palms. They were from a cooking fire, years before. But in this light, he saw them as a different kind of wound. He told the town I said it. He put out posters, that I was his wife, that I was mad, that I was an arsonist. He has men looking for me. Not just him. He has the law, his father. He put a price on my head, a reward for his lost wife." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were wide, full of a terror so old and deep it had become a part of her. "Do you understand?" she asked, her voice breaking. "There is no law that will protect me. There is no town I can hide in. If he finds me, he will kill me, or he will take me back, and he will own me, and he will hurt me, every day, just to prove that he can—" She sank down onto a sack of beans, her strength gone. "That's why I ran from you. From Harmony Creek. It was too good. I was too happy. I knew he would find me, and I knew you would try to stop him, and he would kill you. Elias, he would kill you, and it would be my fault." Elias stood there, his face carved from stone. He had listened without moving, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The air in the tent was thick, vibrating with her confession. He was quiet for a long time. He walked over to her. He did not kneel. He stood over her, a tall, solid shadow. "He burned you," Elias said. It was not a question. "He tried. He hurt you." "Yes." Elias looked down at his own hands, calloused and scarred from work and from the cold. He looked at her. He saw the teacher he had known, and he saw this new woman, this Miss Leah, who was all sharp edges and hidden fear. He saw the strength it had taken for her to survive, to keep running, to stay alive. He finally spoke, his voice low and rough, like stones grinding together. "I'd kill the man for you," he said. Cora looked up, her eyes full of tears. "But I'd rather just hold you." That broke her, the kindness. It was not the promise of violence, but the promise of comfort that shattered the last of her control. All the fear, the loneliness, the years of looking over her shoulder, of being someone else, of sleeping with one eye open. It all came pouring out. She didn't make a sound. She just launched herself at him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face burying itself in his rough wool shirt. She clung to him, her body shaking with silent, racking sobs. Elias's arms came around her, pulling her tight, so tight she could barely breathe. He held her as if she were the only thing in the world, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. He didn't say, "It'll be all right." He didn't make empty promises. He just held her. He just stood, a solid, unmoving rock in her storm, and let her break against him. She cried for the schoolhouse. She cried for her name. She cried for the 2 years she had lost, hiding in this cold, cruel place. When the sobs finally quieted, she was still holding on, and he was still holding her. She was exhausted, empty, but for the first time in years, her hands were not shaking. She tilted her head back, looking up at him. His face was just inches from hers. His eyes were dark, full of an emotion she could not name. It was not pity. It was something deeper. It was hunger. It was recognition.
Elias,
She whispered. He kissed her. It was not the gentle brush of a kiss she remembered by the creek. This was slow and desperate and aching with 2 years of hunger. It was a kiss that tasted of snow and fear and dried beef, and a longing so profound it was a kind of pain. His lips were chapped, hard, but they were warm, and they were real. She kissed him back, her hands moving from his waist, up his chest, to his face. Her fingers explored the stubble on his jaw, the line of his cheekbone, as if she were blind and was learning him by touch. He groaned, a low sound in his chest, and his hands tightened on her, one hand sliding down her back, pressing her hips against his, the other still tangled in her hair. He kissed her as if he were a dying man, and she was water. She broke the kiss, breathless, her forehead resting against his.
"Not here,"
she whispered.
"Pike, his men—"
"Where?" he asked, his voice rough. She looked around the supply tent. It was cold. It smelled of canvas and grain. It was not theirs. "My tent," she said. She took his hand. Her hand was shaking again, but not from fear, from desire. She led him out of the supply tent, her heart pounding. The camp was quiet, the midday lull. Everyone was in the mess tent, or in their own quarters, hiding from the cold. No one saw them. Her tent was tiny, a canvas wedge barely big enough for her small straw pallet and a wooden crate that served as a table. It was cold, but it was hers. It was the only place in the world that was. She pulled him inside, the flap falling shut, plunging them into a dim, gray light. The only illumination came from a single, small lantern she had left burning low. They stood, facing each other, not touching. The air was electric. They were two strangers who knew each other better than anyone else in the world. They were both scarred. He by the cold and the ride, she by the fire and the fear. He moved first. He reached out and, with one finger, gently touched the locket at her throat. "Jedediah Stone," he said. "The traitor. He said he saw a woman with a locket." "My mother's," she whispered, her hand closing over his.
"It's all I have left of her."
His eyes held hers. "You're beautiful. Cora."
"I'm not,"
she said, a raw, honest words.
"I'm worn out."
"You are," he insisted. He touched the faint scar on her temple, where a burning ember had landed. "You're alive." She pulled him down onto the pallet. It was rough. It crackled beneath them. Their hands were shaking. His from the cold and the weakness. Hers from the newness of this, the terror of wanting something this much. Their desire was real, and it was unstoppable. It was not a gentle, courtly love. It was raw, and it was a need. It was two broken people who had been alone for so long, finally finding a way to breathe again. They undressed each other by the dim lamplight, their movements clumsy, urgent. She saw the new scars on his feet, the angry red and white of the frostbite. He saw the old, silvery scars on her arms, the ones she always kept hidden. He touched them, his fingers tracing the raised skin. He did not ask. He did not flinch. He just looked at them, and then he looked at her, and he kissed each one. He kissed the scar on her arm, the one on her wrist, the one on her palm. He kissed them as if he were healing them, as if he were kissing away the fire. She wept again, but this time it was a release. There was no shame. Not in this tent, not with this man. They made love. It was vivid and tender. It was raw, and it was healing. It was the frantic, desperate coupling of two people who thought they would never feel warmth again. It was the slow, tender exploration of two people who had all the time in the world. It was a reclaiming. He was not Jebediah Thorne. He was not taking. He was giving. And she was not a victim. She was alive. And she was in his arms. And she was, for this one small moment, entirely safe. Afterward, they lay tangled together under her one thin blanket, their bodies pressed close, sharing what little warmth they had. The lamplight flickered, casting shadows on the canvas walls. They were both breathing hard, as if they had just run a great distance. Cora lay with her head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. He stroked her hair, his hand still rough, but his touch gentle. "We'll leave," he whispered. "Tonight, as soon as it's dark, we'll take the horse and we'll ride." The cold, hard reality of her life came crashing back in. She stiffened in his arms. She pulled away, just enough to look at him. "No," she said, her voice flat. His face tightened. "Cora, you can't stay here. This man, Pike, he's dangerous, and Thorne. If he can find you, this is the first place he'd look. A camp full of women with nowhere else to go." "I know," she said, sitting up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The cold air hit her skin, and she shivered. "That's why I have to stay." "That makes no sense. It's the only sense there is," she said, her voice turning hard. "Don't you see, Elias? I'm safe here, in a way. Pike is a monster, but he's a predictable monster. He controls everything. No one comes in, and no one goes out, without his say-so. Jebediah can't find me here. His men can't find me." "He's already suspicious of you," Elias argued, sitting up. "He suspects. He saw you. He'll find out about me." "That's why you have to go," she said, her eyes pleading. "Alone. If they find you, if they find us, if Pike knows I've been with a man, he'll punish me. He'll—" She couldn't say the words. "He'll make an example of me. He'll call me a whore in front of the others. He'll have Silas and Jonas, or he'll just throw me out into the snow. And then Jebediah will find me, or the cold will. I won't let that happen." "You can't stop it," she said, her voice breaking again. "Not by being here. You'll only make it worse. You have to go. You have to leave me." "Cora, I will not." "You must," she insisted. She grabbed the front of his shirt. "Elias, listen to me. This is the only way. You're hurt. Your feet. You can't ride far in this cold. You're weak. You need to get to a town. You need to heal." He looked at her, his jaw set in a stubborn line. He saw the terror in her eyes, and he saw the logic, as cold and hard as the land outside. She was right. He was in no shape to fight, and his presence here was a danger to her. "I'll come back," he swore. "I'll go to the next town. I'll get help. I'll find a way." "No," she said, her voice small. "Don't come back. Just go." "I'm coming back for you," he said, his voice fierce. "I'm coming back, and I'm taking you away from all of this. I'll take you away the right way. With the law, if I can find it. With a gun, if I can't." She said nothing. She knew the law was not on her side. She knew what men with guns did. Elias saw the despair in her face. He pulled her to him. "One last time." "I will come back," he swore, his voice a vow in the cold air. She said nothing. She just kissed him, a long, desperate kiss that tasted of salt. Her tears were on her face, and he kissed them, too. Now, she whispered, pulling away.
Go, before the evening service, before they're all out. Go, and don't look back.
He dressed, his movements stiff with pain and reluctance. He pulled on his frozen, damaged boots. He stood at the tent flap, a tall, broken man. "Cora," he said.
Go,
she whispered. He slipped out of the tent, a shadow disappearing into the white. Cora sat on her pallet, the blanket clutched around her. She was cold, colder than she had been before, but she was not alone. She had felt his touch. She had his vow. She heard the sound of the bell, the one Reverend Pike used to call them to prayer. It was time. She had to go. She had to kneel in the snow and pray for forgiveness for sins she had not committed, all while hiding the one sin, the one beautiful, healing sin that had just saved her life. The ride away from her was the hardest thing he had ever done. Every hoofbeat of old Jet, now rested and fed on the grain Cora had stolen, felt like a betrayal. His body was a landscape of pain. The frostbite on his feet had settled into a deep, throbbing agony, and his hands were raw, swollen claws that could barely hold the reins. He was weak, and he was leaving her in the hands of a cold-eyed zealot. The promise he had made, "I will come back," felt thin and brittle in the vast, frozen air. He rode for 3 days, following the trader's map in reverse. He pushed himself and the horse, stopping only when the animal was near collapse. He did not build fires. He ate his dried beef frozen, gnawing on it until his jaw ached. He slept in hollows of rock, wrapping his damaged feet in the last of Cora's clean linen, and dreamed of her face in the lamplight. He finally reached a town. It was not Harmony Creek. It was a larger, rougher place called Sovereign, a territorial way station built on mud, whiskey, and the rumor of silver in the nearby hills. He sold the last of his cartridges, all but the 6 in his revolver, for a stall for his horse, a plate of hot food, and a small, cold room above the saloon. He paid a boy 2 cents to fill a tub with hot water. He sat in the steaming water for an hour, the first real warmth he had felt in days. The pain in his feet was excruciating, but he saw that the flesh, while angry and red, was not black. He had not lost them. He had Cora to thank for that. The next morning, he put on the one clean shirt from his saddlebag and walked, his gait stiff and pained, to the small office of the town's only lawyer, a Mr. Alistair Ambrose. Ambrose was a small, neat man with tired eyes and a vest that was missing a button. He looked at Elias, at his rough clothes, his gaunt face, and the raw, chapped skin of his hands, and his expression was one of professional patience. "And what legal matter brings you to Sovereign, Mr.?"
Elias, just Elias.
He did not sit. He could not. The energy in him was too sharp. "I need help with a man. Back east, a sheriff's son in Ohio." Ambrose sighed, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Elias, the arm of the law barely reaches the edge of this town, let alone across the plains to Ohio. If this is a matter of a bounty, or a debt—" "His name is Jebediah Thorne," Elias said, cutting him off. "He's hunting a woman, a school teacher. He burned her school down. He's put out word, fake posters, that she's his wife, that she's an arsonist." Ambrose's expression did not change. "And you have proof of this?" "I have her word," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous.
"Mr. Elias,"
Ambrose said, leaning back. "Her word against a sheriff's son. I'm afraid, even if I could, there is nothing to be done. The law is a blunt instrument. It does not often side with runaways." Elias felt the cold rage rising. This was what she had told him. This was the wall. "She's not a runaway? She's a victim." "The world is full of victims," Ambrose said, not unkindly. "I cannot help you with Mr. Thorne." Elias stood, his fists clenched. He was a fool to have come. He would have to go back with just his gun, but he had to try the other way. "There's another man," Elias said, his voice flat. "A Reverend Pike. He runs a revival camp for women out past the Red Canyons. He keeps them by fear. He's got guards." At the name Pike, Alistair Ambrose changed. It was not a large movement. It was a stiffening of his spine, a sudden, sharp focus in his tired eyes. He put his hands flat on his desk.
"Tell me about this camp,"
he said, his voice losing all its professional distance. Elias told him. He described the layout, the cold, the fear he saw in Cora, the two hard men, Silas and Jonas, who acted as guards. When he was finished, Ambrose was silent for a full minute. He stared at a crack in the plaster wall. "My sister," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Her name was Sarah. She was 16. A man in her church, a married man, took an interest in her. When she was in trouble, she was cast out. She had nowhere to go. She found her way to a place like that, not Pike's, another one, near the border. Ambrose stood and walked to the window, his back to Elias. "They saved her. They made her work. Laundress for a nearby army post. They made her kneel for hours, praying for her sin. They took her wages. They took her letters. When I finally found her, 6 months later, she was not my sister. She was a hollow, terrified thing. I tried to take her home. She refused. She said she was unclean." He turned, his face a mask of old, cold grief. "She walked into the river 2 weeks later." Elias said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Reverend Pike," Ambrose said, his voice now sharp as steel, "is not unknown to me, or to the territorial marshal. He's more than a zealot. Mr. Elias, he is a trafficker. He moves these women, uses them for labor, takes their money. We've been trying to get an agent inside for months, but he's clever, and the land is remote." "So you can help," Elias said. "I can," Ambrose said. "Pike is under quiet investigation. What I can give you is this." He went to a locked cabinet and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "This is a copy of a territorial injunction. It names Pike. It names his camp. It's not an arrest warrant, not yet, but it gives any territorial agent the right to inspect his property and question his flock." He handed the papers to Elias. "This is a weapon. Mr. Elias, this is the law. You write in there. You show him this. He will know the game is over. He will know the marshal is watching. He will not risk a fight he cannot win." "And Thorn?" Elias asked, holding the papers. They felt heavy, solid. "Thorn is a shadow," Ambrose said, "but Pike is a man I can touch." He went to his desk. "I will send a telegraph to the marshal in Ohio. I will inquire, as a fellow officer of the court, about the case of a Mr. Jebediah Thorn and a Miss Cora Reed. It may take days. It may lead to nothing, but I will send it." Elias put the papers inside his coat. "How long?" "For the telegraph, 4 days, maybe 5. You need to heal, Mr. Elias. Your feet. You won't be any good to your friend if you're a cripple. Stay, heal. My wife will send over some salve. Wait for my word." Elias nodded. To wait was a new kind of torture, but he had a weapon now, a piece of paper that was stronger than his gun. He did not know that, back in the canyon, the cold had become Cora's full-time jailer. The evening Elias left, she had gone to the prayer service. She had knelt in the snow as Reverend Pike's voice washed over her, a torrent of words about sin and vipers and the whores of Babylon. "There is a sickness in this camp," he had boomed, his eyes finding hers in the flickering torchlight. "A sickness of the flesh, a deceitful heart, hiding its sin from the light. But the Lord sees, the Lord knows the harlot's heart." Cora kept her head bowed, her face a mask of numb obedience. But something inside her had changed. Before, she had been Leah, a shadow, hiding. Now, she was Cora, a woman who had been held and kissed and loved. She had been seen. Pike sensed the change. He saw it as defiance, Her quiet, her submission, was no longer born of fear. It was a wall. He could not see behind it, and it made him furious. The next day, he confronted her by the sick tent.
"Sister Leah," he said, his voice a low, dangerous purr, "you have not confessed. The Lord has laid it on my heart that you are burdened by a secret sin."
"I am burdened by my work, Reverend," she said, her voice quiet. "Do not be proud," he snapped. "You will tell me. You will confess your sin to me, and I will absolve you." "I have nothing to confess, Reverend." It was the wrong thing to say. His face, which had been a mask of false piety, contorted. His hand, the one holding the Bible, shot out and he struck her across the face. The blow was hard, brutal. It sent her staggering back, her cheek exploding in pain. "The sin of pride!" he yelled. And now the other women, drawn by the sound, huddled in the doorways of their tents, watching, terrified. "The sin of the flesh! I saw you, looking at my men! You will not bring your filth into this holy place!" Cora touched her cheek. She tasted blood. "You will confess," he hissed. "No," she whispered. "Then you will kneel," he said, pointing to the open space in the center of the camp. A patch of ground cleared of snow but frozen solid. "You will kneel there. You will not eat. You will not drink. You will not move until the Lord breaks your stubborn spirit and you confess your sin to this flock." "Please, Reverend," Martha, the young girl, cried out. She's good." Pike's head snapped to her. "Back to your tent, girl, or you will join her." Martha shrank back, sobbing. Cora looked at Pike. His eyes were alight with a cold, righteous fire. He was enjoying this. This was his power. She did not look at him. She looked at the other women. She saw their fear, their pity, their shame, and she walked to the center of the camp. The ground was frozen iron, studded with sharp ice and frozen gravel. She gathered her skirts and she knelt. The day passed. The sun, a weak, watery thing, crawled across the sky. The cold seeped into her, a deep, penetrating chill. Pike's men, Silas and Jonas, watched her, their expressions bored, as if she were a stubborn animal. Reverend Pike went on with his day, his voice loud as he led prayers, as if she were not there. Her knees, at first, went numb, then the pain started, a deep, grinding ache as the sharp rocks and ice pressed into her skin, through her thin wool skirt. She did not move. She thought of Elias. She thought of his promise, "I will come back." As dusk fell, the cold became unbearable. The pain was no longer an ache. It was a fire. She felt a wetness, a warmth, and thought for a moment she had lost control of her bladder. Then she looked down. In the gray, fading light, she saw the dark stains on her gray skirt, just at the knees. It was blood. Her knees were bleeding, the skin broken, the blood freezing as it hit the air. "Have you confessed, Sister Leah?" Pike called from the door of the mess tent. She looked up. Her face was gray with pain. "I have nothing to confess." He smiled. "The Lord is not finished with you." She spent the night kneeling. She fainted twice. No one came to help her. She would wake, slumped on the frozen ground, and pull herself back up to her knees. This was not just a punishment. This was an execution, slow and cold. When the dawn came, she was still kneeling, but she was barely conscious. Her body was a single, vibrating field of pain. Pike came to her. He stood over her, a black shadow against the gray sky. "You are defiant," he said, his voice almost sad. "You are a lost cause. Your sin has hardened your heart." He motioned to Silas. "Take her to her tent. She is forbidden from leaving. She will not work. She will not speak to the others. She will await the Lord's judgment in solitude." Silas, a man with a brutal, empty face, grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet. She cried out as her knees screamed in protest, the frozen, bloody skirt tearing free from the ground. He dragged her to her tent and threw her inside, like a sack of grain. She lay on her pallet for a day. She was in a daze of pain and cold. Martha, defying Pike, crept in at night with a cup of water and a piece of bread, her eyes wide with terror.
"You have to," Martha whispered. "You have to just tell him what he wants. He'll kill you." "He already has,"
Cora whispered back, her lips cracked. But as she lay there, a new, terrible thought began to form. Elias had sworn he would come back. "I will come back and take you away the right way." He was coming. With his gun, or with the law, he was coming back for her. And she realized, with a clarity that cut through the pain, that his return would be his death. Pike would not be cowed by a single man. Silas and Jonas would shoot him on sight. He was one man against a camp. Her love for him, the memory of his touch, had been her strength. Now, it was her greatest terror. She had to save him from his own honor. She had to be gone, not just from Pike. She had to be gone from Elias. She had to run, not to save herself, but to save him. The plan formed. She had to escape, but only if he never came back. No, she had to escape before he came back. She began to plan. She hoarded the bread Martha brought. She took the small, sharp knife she used for her poultices. She used the last of her thread to mend the tears in her thin cloak. She was waiting for her knees to heal enough to walk, waiting for a chance. 5 days after he had arrived in Sovereign, Elias walked out of Alistair Ambrose's office. He had the injunction papers in his coat, and he had the telegraph reply. Ambrose had looked grim. "The telegraph is inconclusive. The sheriff in that county, a Mr. Thorne, replied. He confirms that a Cora Reed is wanted for arson and theft. He states she is unstable, and that his son, Jebediah, is heartbroken and still searching for his lost wife." "It's a lie," Elias said, his voice flat. "Of course it is," Ambrose said. "It's a neat, tidy story, all wrapped up by the law. I'm sorry, Elias. The law in Ohio is on his side, but the law in this territory is on yours." He tapped the injunction papers. "This is your weapon against Pike. Use it. Get her out of there. And then, once she is clear, bring her here. We will figure out the rest." Elias rode out of Sovereign with a new horse, bought with the last of his money, and saddlebags full of food, ammunition, and Ambrose's salves. He rode with a cold, righteous fury. He had the law. He rode hard, the way he had before. But this time, he was not a desperate, freezing man. He was an instrument. He reached the canyon on the second night. He did not ride in. He left his horse in a copse of frozen pines a mile away. He walked in, a shadow in the moonlight, his rifle in his hand. He moved past the perimeter. He saw no guards. The camp was still, silent under a fresh blanket of snow. He went to the supply tent first, empty. His heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drum. He crept to her tent, at the edge of the camp. He knew. She would be there. He had the paper. He would show her. He would get her, and they would leave. He pulled back the canvas flap. The tent was empty. It was not just empty. It was cold. A deep, long, empty cold. The pallet was bare. The wooden crate was overturned. The emptiness was a physical blow. Worse than the cold. Worse than the ride. He had failed. He was too late. He lit a match, his hand shaking. The small, flickering light fell on something on the frozen ground, a piece of folded paper, held down by a small, sharp stone. His name was on it, Elias. His fingers, numb, fumbled with the paper. He knew what it was before he even read it. The same precise script, the same impossible demand. "You came back. I knew you would. You are a good man, and I will not be the reason you die. Don't follow. Don't die for me." The match burned his fingers, and he dropped it. He stood in the dark, the paper in his hand, the world, his hope, all of it, collapsing into a single cold point of failure. He went back to the supply tent, his movements numb, automatic. He searched it. The grain sacks were there, the linens, and, in a dark corner, a small, bloody rag. He knelt, touching it. It was stiff, frozen, blood. He went back to her tent, lit another match. He looked at the ground. He saw the dark, frozen stains near the pallet, where she must have tended her knees. Pike had done this. The rage was so cold and so pure it burned away his despair. He was no longer a rescuer. He was a hunter. He left the camp. He did not go to Pike. Pike was nothing. She was gone. He had to find her. He went back to his horse, and at first light, he began the search. He was a man of the land. He knew how to read it, but she had a full day's lead, maybe more, and the snow covered everything. He rode in widening circles from the camp. He searched for days. The land was a fresh, white grave. He was looking for a ghost. On the third day, he found it. Not a footprint, a mistake, a piece of her gray wool skirt, a single thread, caught on the thorny branch of a bush, far south of the canyon. She was not a tracker. She was a schoolteacher, and she was on foot. He followed the trail. It was agonizingly slow. A scuff in the snow, a broken twig, a place where she had clearly fallen and rested. She was hurt. Her knees. He rode, his jaws set, his heart a cold stone. The trail led him away from the towns, away from the flatlands. It led him up, into the high, broken country, a place of frozen ridges, deep, wind-scoured canyons, and bitter, endless snow. He crested a high ridge and looked out. The land before him was a jagged, desolate maze of rock and ice. The trail, what little he had of it, led directly into it. He knew this place. The maps called it the Broken Barrens. The locals called it outlaw territory. Cora had been walking for 3 days, or perhaps it was 4. The world had become a white, jagged hell, and time had dissolved into a simple, brutal rhythm, one foot in front of the other. The pain in her knees was a constant, screaming fire. The wounds, broken open by the escape from Pike's camp, had scabbed, then frozen, then broken again. She had torn strips from her petticoat to bind them, but the blood soaked through and froze the fabric to her skin. She was not a woman of the wild. She was a schoolteacher. She had no map, only a desperate, foolish idea. South. If she could just keep walking south, she would eventually be out of the territory, away from Pike, away from the reach of Jebediah Thorne. She was aiming for Mexico, a place she had only read about, a place she imagined was all sun and sand, a place where a woman with a past could dissolve and be forgotten. She was starving. The bread Martha had given her was gone in the first day. Her body, already weakened by the kneeling, was consuming itself. She was lightheaded, and at times she would see the schoolhouse burning in the shimmering snow. She would see Elias, his face gaunt, telling her to run. "Don't die for me," she had written. Now, she was the one dying. She stumbled over a snow-covered rock and fell, landing hard on her hands. The sharp pain barely registered. She lay there, just for a moment, the snow cold and soft against her cheek. It would be so easy to sleep. A sound cut through her daze, not the wind, horses, and men's voices rough and loud. She tried to scramble up, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The landscape was open, a frozen, rocky slope. She was a dark, ragged shape against a field of white. They came over the ridge, 4 of them. They were not lawmen. They were not prospectors. Their clothes were a mix of stolen army coats and rough furs, their faces hidden by thick, untrimmed beards. They reined in their horses a 6 yards away, looking down at her as if she were a curious, wounded animal. "Well, well," the leader said. He was a large man with a red beard and eyes so pale they looked like chips of ice. "What we got here, boys?" a little frozen bird. Cora pushed herself to her knees, her hands balled into fists.
"Leave me alone," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp.
The men laughed. The leader dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. He walked over to her, his hand resting on the butt of the pistol at his hip.
"Leave you alone? Now, ma'am, that ain't neighborly. You look like you're in a peck of trouble."
He reached down and grabbed a fistful of her cloak, hauling her to her feet. She cried out as her knees buckled. He held her up, his face close to hers. He smelled of unwashed wool, whiskey, and smoke. "Where you headed, little bird?" he sneered.
"South,"
she spat, her fear giving way to a cold, hard defiance. "South," she says. He laughed again. "Ain't nothing south but more of this, till you hit the border." He looked her over, his eyes traveling from her matted hair, to her bruised face, to her bloody, torn skirt. "Running from someone? Now let me go." "I think," he said, "we'll just take you with us. Camp's just over the rise. We could use a woman, cook our meals, mend our clothes." "I will not," Cora said. "You will," he said, and shoved her toward his horse. One of the other men, a younger one with a pinched, weasel-like face, suddenly snapped his fingers. "Wait, Brand, wait, I seen her." The leader, Brand, turned. "Seen her where? Silas." "In Sovereign, in the marshal's office. A poster." He squinted at Cora, who had frozen, her blood turning to ice. "Yeah, that's her. A reward, $500, for a runaway wife. Arsonist." It said, "Name of Cora Reed." Brand's pale eyes lit up, not with greed, but with a new, uglier interest. $500 for a crazy woman." He grinned, a terrible, yellow-toothed expression. "Or maybe she ain't full of crazy. Maybe she just run off from a rich husband, and he wants his property back." He stalked back to her. "So, Cora, you're worth money." He grabbed her locket, the one Elias had touched, and ripped it from her neck. The thin chain snapped, cutting her skin. "No!" she screamed, lunging for it. He backhanded her. She fell to the snow, the world exploding in white light. "Tie her up," Brand ordered, pocketing the locket. "We'll decide what to do with her in camp. $500. Or maybe we just keep her for a while. A man gets lonely." They threw her over the back of a pack mule, her hands and feet bound, and she was carried into the heart of outlaw territory, a prisoner of the very lie she had been running from. Miles behind them, Elias was on foot. His horse, the good bay he had bought in Sovereign, had given its last. The animal had pushed through snowdrifts for 2 days, its lungs heaving, until its heart had simply given out. It had collapsed in a high mountain pass, and Elias, with a tightness in his chest, had taken the saddle, his rifle, and his pack, and left the animal to the elements. He was a man reduced to his boots and his will. He was no longer just a tracker. He was a force of nature, as cold and as single-minded as the wind. He had followed her trail, and then the trail of the men who took her. He found the spot where she had fallen, the churned snow, the tracks of 4 horses and a mule. He found the single, frozen drop of blood on the ice, near where her locket chain had been broken. He tasted it, the coppery tang of her blood. It was a dark sacrament, and it sealed his fate. He would kill every man who had laid a hand on her. He walked for a day, and a night, and another day. He did not feel the cold. He did not feel the pain in his feet, which were now just numb, blunt instruments. He was running on the cold, pure rage he had felt in her empty tent. He was following the sound of their horses, a faint echo in the canyons, and the smell of their smoke. He found their camp at dusk. On the 3rd day, it was a cluster of lean-tos and a single, ragged tent, pitched in a box canyon sheltered from the wind. A small fire smoked in the center. He saw 4 men. He saw her. She was tied to a wagon wheel, left out in the cold like an animal. Her face was swollen, her lips split. She was not moving. For a terrible, heart-stopping moment, he thought she was dead. Then he saw the faint cloud of her breath. He sank behind a line of boulders, his rifle in his hands. He was one man, they were four. He was on foot, they had horses, he was weak from hunger, and they were by their fire. The odds were impossible. He did not care. He checked his rifle. He had 8 rounds. He had 6 in his revolver, 14 bullets. He would make them count. He waited. He waited for the dark, and the dark brought the storm. It was not snow this time. It was a high-country thunderstorm, a freak of the changing season. The sky, which had been a clear, cold purple, turned a bruised black. The wind picked up, howling through the canyon, and the first flash of lightning lit the camp in a stark, blue-white glare. A clap of thunder followed, so loud it shook the ground. Rain began to fall, cold as ice, turning the snow to slush. This was his chance. In the camp, the men cursed and ran for shelter. "Get the horses!" Brand yelled over the wind. "Silas, you fool! Douse that fire before it catches the tent!" Brand ran to Cora, who was now soaked, her hair plastered to her face. He untied her from the wheel. "Get in the tent, you!" he growled, grabbing her arm. "No," she said, her voice a low, animal rasp. She was prepared to die. She had been sitting there, planning it. She would not be taken. She would not be owned. She would bite through her own tongue if she had to, drown on her own blood. "What did you say?" Brand sneered, the rain running off his beard. She looked at him, her eyes as wild as the storm. "No." He laughed and grabbed her, his fingers digging into her arms, pulling her toward him. "You got fight, do you? I like that. I'll break it." He tried to kiss her. Cora, fueled by the last of her strength, by the memory of Jebediah, by the memory of Elias, bit him. She sank her teeth into his bottom lip, tasting the salt of his skin and the rust of his blood. He screamed, a high, thin sound of rage and pain, and threw her to the ground. "You," he choked, his hand to his bleeding mouth. "You'll pay for that. I'll—" The first shot was a flat crack that was not thunder. The man named Silas, the one with the weasel face, who was running from the horses, just stopped. He looked down at the red flower blooming on his chest, then fell face first into the mud. Elias had fired from less than 50 yards. "Sniper!" one of the others yelled, diving behind a stack of supplies. Brand stared into the rain, his pistol in his hand. "Where?" he roared. Elias did not wait. He ran, firing the rifle from his hip. He was not a soldier, but he was a hunter. He moved low and fast, using the chaos of the storm, the rain, the flickering lightning. Another shot. The second man, the one behind the supplies, cried out and clutched his shoulder. Elias was in the camp. He dropped the rifle, useless now, and pulled his revolver. He saw Brand, a large shadow, turning, firing wildly into the rain. He saw Cora, a small, dark shape on the ground. "Cora!" he yelled, his voice raw. "Elias!" she screamed, a sound of disbelief and terror. A third man, coming from the lean-to, raised his shotgun. Elias turned. He fired twice. The man's chest exploded. He fell. 2 men down, 1 wounded, 1 to go. Brand saw him. He saw Elias, a gaunt, terrifying figure, his face a mask of mud and rain, his eyes burning. Elias took a step toward Cora, his gun raised. Brand was faster. He did not aim at Elias. He grabbed Cora, pulling her up as a shield, his arm around her throat, his pistol to her head. "Drop it!" Brand screamed, his voice high with panic, blood still running from his lip. "Drop the gun, or she dies now!" Elias froze. He was 10 feet away. He could see the terror in Cora's eyes, and the rain washing the blood and mud from her face. "Elias," she choked. "Don't—" "I said, drop it!" Brand yelled. Elias let the revolver fall from his numb fingers. It landed in the mud with a soft thud. "Good," Bran sneered. "Now, you're the one she's running to." A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, freezing them all in a tableau of blue light. And in that flash, Elias saw the fourth man, the one he had wounded. He was crawling, his arm useless, but his other hand was reaching for Silas's fallen pistol. At the same time, Bran, distracted, turned his head toward the movement. It was all Cora needed. She had been waiting, her body coiled, her mind cold and clear. She stomped her heel down, hard, on Bran's instep, and at the same time, she jammed her elbow back into his ribs. It was not enough to free her, but it was enough to make him grunt, his grip loosening, the pistol wavering. Elias did not hesitate. He dove, not for his gun, but for his boots. He had his hunting knife strapped to his ankle. He came up, the blade in his hand, and plunged forward. Bran saw him coming. He shoved Cora away and fired. The sound was deafening. Elias felt a white-hot, searing pain tear through his side. It was like being kicked by a mule. The force spun him around, but he did not fall. His momentum carried him forward. He crashed into Bran. The knife went in, once, deep, under the ribs. Bran's eyes went wide, a look of shocked surprise. He fired again, but the shot went wide, into the dark sky. He looked down at the knife hilt in his chest, then at Elias. He opened his bleeding mouth, but only a gurgle came out. He slid to the ground, dead. The wounded man was raising the pistol. Elias, his side on fire, his vision graying at the edges, picked up his own revolver from the mud. He fired. One last time. The man fell still. Silence. There was no sound but the rain, the wind, and the sound of two people, gasping for breath. Elias stood, swaying. He looked at Cora. She was on her knees, staring at him, her eyes wide. He took a step, and his legs buckled. She was there, scrambling to him, catching him. "Elias! Elias!" He leaned on her, his arm over her shoulder. The rain was cold, but his side was burning. He looked down. His hand, when he pulled it away from his side, was black with blood. "You're bleeding," Cora whispered, her voice trembling. He looked at her split lip, her bruised face. He managed a grim smile. "So are you." He cupped her face, his muddy, bloody hand against her skin, and in the rain, surrounded by the dead, he kissed her. It was a desperate, messy kiss. It tasted of blood, and rain, and gunpowder. It was the most alive he had ever felt. "We have to go," he whispered, his voice failing. "Horses." "Yes," she said, her voice suddenly hard. She was not a victim. She was not a ghost. She was a survivor. She got him to his feet. She found the horses still tied, their eyes wild with terror. She cut his saddle from his dead horse, and, her hands shaking, she saddled two of the outlaw's mounts. She found his rifle. She found her locket in Bran's pocket and put it back around her own neck. She helped him mount, a terrible, clumsy process that made him cry out, a sharp, bitten-off sound. She mounted her own horse. Together, wounded, exhausted, but alive, they rode out of the canyon, leaving the storm and the dead behind them. They rode all night, a gray, agonizing blur. Elias stayed in the saddle by pure will, his hand pressed to his side. Cora rode beside him, her hand on his leg, as if to hold him there. As the first pale gray light of dawn broke over the plains, the storm had passed. The world was quiet, washed clean. Elias, who had been a solid, unwavering presence beside her, swayed. "Elias," she said, her voice sharp. He looked at her, his eyes unfocused. He tried to smile. "Cora," he whispered, and he fell from the saddle. He hit the ground, a heavy, final sound. "No!" she screamed. She leaped from her horse and ran to him. He was unconscious, his face the color of ash. The front of his shirt was a solid, dark mass of dried and fresh blood. She was alone, in the middle of a vast, empty plain, with a dying man. She looked around, frantic. There, in the distance, a thin curl of smoke. From a low rise, no, not smoke, just a collapsed shape. A hunter's hut, an old, sod-roofed shack, abandoned. It was a mile away. She could not lift him. He was too heavy. "You will not die," she said, her voice a low, fierce growl. "I will not let you." She grabbed him under the arms. She began to drag him. Her knees, her raw, bleeding knees, screamed. The pain was so bright it was almost white. She did not care. She dragged him, 1 foot at a time. She fell. She got up. She pulled. The sun was rising, and she was a small, dark figure, pulling her world, her life, across the empty plain. It took her hours. When she finally reached the hut, she was crying, not from pain, but from effort. She rolled him inside, onto the dirt floor. The hut was empty, save for a few old, dry leaves. It was shelter. She ran back for the horses. She tore the saddlebags off, grabbing his pack, the canteens, the med kit from Ambrose. She spent the day and the night tending him. She cleaned the wound. The bullet had gone clean through his side. It was bad, but it had missed his vitals. She prayed. She packed it with the salve from Ambrose's wife, and she bound it with the last of her torn petticoat, the last of his clean shirt. He was burning with fever. She sat in the dark, in the cold, dirt hut, her hand on his forehead, wiping his face with a damp rag. He thrashed, calling for her, calling her name. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm here. Elias." He quieted at the sound of her voice. She watched him breathe, the shallow, painful rise and fall of his chest. She had spent 2 years running from a man who wanted to own her, running from a man who wanted to save her. She had run from fire, and run from love. She looked at his face, pale in the moonlight that streamed through the hole in the roof. He had come for her. He had crossed a blizzard, and he had walked into a gunfight, all for her. He had died for her. Almost. She put her head down on his chest, her ear over his heart. The beat was weak, but it was there, steady. "I'm never running again," she whispered to the sleeping man, a vow to him, and to the vast, quiet dark. "You hear me? I'm not leaving. You found me. I'm never leaving again." They lived in the hunter's hut for 8 days, or perhaps it was 9. Time became a slow, quiet river, measured not in hours, but in the rhythm of Elias's breathing and the painful healing of Cora's knees. The world was reduced to the 4 square yards of dirt floor, the low sod roof, and the sliver of gray sky visible through the doorway. Cora refused to leave his side. She was his nurse, his guard, his anchor. She ventured out only to check on the horses, hidden in a small draw, and to gather dry brush for a tiny, almost smokeless fire she built just outside the hut's entrance. She would heat rocks and bring them in, wrapping them in pieces of the outlaw's saddle blankets to tuck around Elias, fighting the deep, invasive chill. For the first 2 days, he was lost in fever. He thrashed, his hands gripping the air, his voice a low, rough murmur. He spoke of the storm, of a man named Jedediah, of her, "Cora," he would say, the word a question, a plea. "Cora, found you." "I am here," she would answer, every single time, her voice firm, her cool, damp hand on his forehead. "I am here. Elias, I'm not running." She tended his wound with a meticulous care that bordered on reverence. The bullet had torn through his side, a ragged, angry path. But as she had prayed, it had missed anything vital. She kept it clean, using the last of the whiskey from an outlaw's flask to sterilize it, and then packing it with the salve from Ambrose's wife. She tended her own wounds with a grim practicality. washing the raw, bloody skin of her knees and binding them with clean strips of cloth. The pain was a distant, familiar echo, a small thing compared to the white-hot terror of losing him. On the third morning, the fever broke. Elias woke, not with a start, but with a slow, quiet surfacing. His eyes, clear for the first time, found her. She was dozing, sitting up against the cold wall, her head resting on her knees, her hand still holding his. "Cora," he whispered. Her head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, her hair a wild tangle around her face.
"Elias,"
she breathed. A slow, radiant smile, a thing he had not seen in 2 years, lit her face. "You're back." "You dragged me," he said, his voice a dry rasp. He remembered the falling, the gray, the feeling of being pulled. "You're too heavy," she said, her voice catching. She pushed his hair back from his forehead. "Don't you ever do that again." He smiled, a weak, small movement of his chapped lips. "I won't." The quiet of the hut, which had been a place of anxious vigil, became a sanctuary. It was a stolen time, a pause between the life they had fled and the one they had not yet dared to imagine. As he regained his strength, they talked. They did not talk of the fire, or the camp, or the blood. Not at first. They shared the small, simple stories of childhood. He told her about growing up on a small, failed farm in Missouri, about his father, a man who saw God in the weather and in the grain, a man who had been quiet, much like him. He told her about leaving home when he was 16, not to run from anything, but to find something, though he never knew what it was. "Until," he said, his eyes on her face, "I met you." She told him about her mother, the one who had given her the locket, a gentle, laughing woman who loved books, who had taught Cora to read from a worn copy of Shakespeare. She told him how her mother had died of a fever, and how her father, a stern, distant man, had sent her to live with an aunt, where she had first learned that her mind, her education, was her only true possession. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said, her voice soft, her gaze on the sliver of sky. "Ever since she read to me, I wanted to give that to other children, the feeling that the world was bigger than the small room you were in." He watched her, his heart aching with a tenderness he did not know how to express. "You're a good teacher. Cora, I saw you. The children, they loved you." Her face clouded. She looked down at her hands, at the faint, silvery scars. "Jebediah Thorne, he burned it. He burned my schoolhouse. He took that away. He took my name." "He didn't take your name," Elias said, his voice low and fierce. He reached out, his hand covering hers. His skin was warm. "You're Cora Reed. You were always Cora Reed. You were just hiding." "Leah," she whispered. "That's what Pike called me. Miss Leah. A name for a ghost." "You are not a ghost." He gripped her hand. "And you will teach again." She shook her head, a quick, fearful motion. "No, I can't. Not when he's still." "We'll find a place," he said, the promise solidifying in his mind, becoming a plan. "A place he's never heard of. A place where no one knows us. Far from Ohio. Far from here. I'll find a place. Cora. Somewhere small. Somewhere safe. Where she'll never be hunted again." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw no doubt. She saw only the steady, quiet certainty that she had first fallen in love with. She saw a man who mended fences, who kept his word, who crossed blizzards. "A place near a stream," she whispered, a dream she had not allowed herself to have. "And wildflowers. A stream and wildflowers," he repeated, like a vow. "I promise." They stayed 4 more days. He grew strong enough to stand, to walk, his hand on her shoulder for support. They ate the last of the outlaw's dried beef. They were a team. She, with her quick, healing hands. He, with his quiet, unshakable strength. On the 9th day, he stood on his own. His wound was healing, the edges clean, her knees, though stiff and scarred, could bear her weight. "It's time," he said. "Where?" she asked. "Harmony Creek," he said. "The town I lived in. It's home. Or it was. I need to see my land, and we need Ambrose, the lawyer. We need to tell him what happened. He's the only one who knows the truth." The thought of returning to a town, to people, to whispers, sent a spike of fear through Cora. But she looked at Elias, at his steady gaze, and she nodded. "Together. Together," he affirmed. The journey back was slow. They rode the 2 outlaw horses, his saddle on one, a bare blanket on the other. They were a ragged, scarred pair. He rode with one hand pressed to his side, his face pale but set. She rode beside him, her back straight, a rifle resting across her lap. She was no longer running. They bypassed Sovereign, heading straight for Harmony Creek. It was a risk, but it was the only place they had. When they rode down the main street of Harmony Creek, the town where he had been a quiet shadow, the townsfolk stopped. They stared. They saw Elias, whom they had thought gone, riding in with a woman who looked like she had been through a war. Her face was bruised, her lips still split, but her eyes were clear. Mrs. Gable, the boarding house landlady, was the first to see her. Her mouth fell open. "Mr. Elias, is that Miss Reed?" "It is, ma'am," Elias said, his voice loud enough for the street. He dismounted, wincing, and turned to help Cora. He held his arms up, and she slid down into them. He did not let her go. He kept one arm around her waist, holding her, supporting her, claiming her in front of them all. "We need a room," he said to Mrs. Gable, "and a message sent to Alistair Ambrose in Sovereign. Tell him we're here. Tell him Cora is safe." The whispers started. Of course, they were a low, rustling wind. She ran off. "She's back. Look at her face. Look at him. What happened out there?" Cora stood, her head held high, Elias's arm a band of iron around her. She met their stares. She was not Miss Leah. She was not a victim. She was Cora Reed. The news came 2 days later, not from Ambrose, but with him. The lawyer rode in on the stage, his face grim. He brought with him a territorial marshal, a tall man with a face like worn leather. They met in the small parlor of the boarding house. "Reverend Pike," Ambrose said, his voice flat, "has been arrested. Your information, Mr. Elias, and the injunction was enough. The marshal's men rode into that camp. It was worse than we thought. He's being held on charges of trafficking, kidnapping, and slavery." Cora, who was sitting beside Elias, let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. One monster was gone. "And," Ambrose continued, turning to her, his gaze softening, "your testimony, Cora, which Elias shared with me, was compelling. I sent that telegraph to Ohio. As I said, it turns out Sheriff Thorne's influence is not as complete as he believed. My inquiry, it stirred something, a marshal in another state, one who has no love for Thorne's family, had an old, outstanding warrant. For a Mr. Jebediah Thorne, for assault and battery in a card game." "What does that mean?" Cora asked, her voice trembling. "It means," Ambrose said, "that while his father can protect him in his own county, he cannot protect him everywhere. Jebediah Thorne is now a wanted man. In another state. He has run. He is no longer hunting you, Miss Reed. He is being hunted himself. Justice. It was not the clean, perfect justice of a storybook. It was messy and complicated and incomplete. But it was a start. It was a stirring." "What now?" Elias asked. "Now," Ambrose said. "You live. But first, Miss Reed, we need to clear your name. Here, the rumors, the arsonist, the runaway wife.
We need to cut the last of Thorne's lies."
The next day, Elias walked with her to the courthouse, a small, 2-room wooden building at the end of the street. The marshal was there. Ambrose was there. Cora, in a simple borrowed dress, her hair pulled back, stood before a local judge. The townsfolk, curious, crowded in the back, whispering. "This is the woman," the marshal announced, his voice booming in the small room, "who survived the Pike camp. This is the woman who was a victim of Jebediah Thorne, a man now fleeing the law, the charges, the rumors, the posters. They were lies, fabricated. The territory recognizes Miss Cora Reed as a free, innocent citizen." The whispers did not stop immediately. They would linger, as whispers do. But Elias held her hand, his grip warm and strong, and as they walked out into the sunshine, he did not look at the crowd. He looked at her. "Where now?" she asked. "Home," he said. He still owned his small plot of land, the one with the 1-room cabin on the outskirts of town. He sold it. He sold his herd. What was left of it. He took that money and the money from the horses, and they left Harmony Creek. They traveled north for 3 weeks, into the high valleys, near the mountains. They found a place. It was a small, hidden valley, a place of tall grass and clean, sharp air. A river, clear and cold, ran through the center, and on the hillsides, as far as they could see, were acres of blue and yellow wildflowers. It was exactly what she had dreamed. They filed the claim. It was their land, his and hers. Elias began to build. He was a man who knew how to work. He cut the timber himself, his wound now just a puckered, angry scar on his side. He notched the logs. He set the foundation. Cora worked beside him. Her hands, soft from teaching, became hard. She chinked the logs with mud and moss. She planted a small garden. She watched him work, his quiet, steady competence a balm to her soul. He built a 1-room cabin, solid and square, with a real glass window and a strong, heavy door. He built a fireplace from river stone and a table from a single slab of pine. It was not a house. It was a fortress. It was a home. They lived. They healed. The silence between them was no longer a space of things unsaid, but a shared, comfortable peace. They learned each other's rhythms. He with his early rising. She with her love of sitting by the fire, reading one of the 3 books she had bought. One evening, in the late autumn, the first snow had begun to fall. It was not a blizzard, not a storm. It was a gentle, quiet dusting, a promise of winter, a promise of peace. Cora stepped out of the cabin, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, to watch it. She saw Elias. He was not by the woodpile. He was down in the flat meadow, near the stream. He was pacing, and then bending, and then placing stones. She walked toward him, her boots quiet in the new snow. He was laying a foundation. A small one, but a square one. He was lining up heavy river stones, his back bent to the work, his breath pluming in the cold air. She knew, instantly, what it was. It was the same size as her first school. She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. He looked up, his face serious from the work, and then he smiled when he saw her. "Elias," she whispered, walking toward him. The snow was falling faster, settling on his hat, on his shoulders. He stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "The ground will be too hard soon," he said, as if it were the most practical thing in the world. "I figured I should get the stones set before the real freeze." She stood in front of him, in the middle of the stone outline, and the tears came. They were not the hot, angry tears of fear or the broken sobs of grief. They were tears of a gratitude so profound it was a physical ache. "I don't deserve this," she cried, the words torn from her. "After all of it, I don't deserve." He stopped her. He took her face in his hands, his rough, calloused, wonderful hands. He tilted her head back, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were dark, and they were full of the whole, wide sky.
Cora, read, he said, his voice low, and it was the only sound in the falling snow. You deserve everything. He kissed her. He kissed her in the falling snow, on the foundation of her new life. It was a fierce kiss, a kiss of a promise kept. It was a grateful kiss, a kiss of a man who had found the one thing he was looking for. It was a kiss of forever, a kiss that said the running was done, the fire was out, and they were, at last, home. In the drawer of the pine table, in the warm, solid cabin, a small book was tucked away. It was a new journal, bound in simple leather. On the first page, in a familiar, clean script, was a letter. It was not addressed to anyone. It was for her. You looked for me. You found me. I'm never leaving again. Thank you for listening to this story from all of us here at From Wild West. We truly hope it brought a piece of the Old West to you. We would love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please drop a comment in English to let us know, and share your thoughts on Elias and Cora's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to From Wild West so you never miss a new tale. We are grateful to have you with us.